Ladies and gentlemen, we hope that you enjoyed the lunch. We'll proceed now with the keynote address by Mr. Winston Griffin. Yes, Mr. Winston Griffin from Procter & Gamble, who will explore why Switzerland is an ideal location for multinational companies. Please, Mr. Griffin.
Thank you, Mario. Bonjour. Good afternoon, Mr. Ambassador, Fabrice Fallier, Mr. Parliamentarian, Edouard Cotet, Professor Jean-Paul Villetti, who I wanted to meet, I couldn't find, Mr. Faisal Abayesaki, and all members of the Swiss Arab Financial Forum. My name is Winston Griffin, and I think you can see it, yes, good. And I am here representing Procter & Gamble. It is unusual, I suppose, in a financial forum, which has a strong bank and financial market angle to it, to represent perhaps another part of the business community. But I accepted this invitation from the Geneva Financial Center with pleasure, with privilege, because the topic is a very relevant one. And the topic is what does Switzerland need to do to keep the multinational company headquarters in Switzerland, Geneva, or wherever of our cantons they might be. So that's why I'm here. In addition to my day job, which is overseeing the operations across P&G globally in the financial area, I also have some external responsibilities, the ones that I think are relevant to our group here today. I'm on the board of the AmCham, Swiss American Chamber of Commerce. Very importantly, we're working closely with the GEM, the Groupe d'Entreprises Multinationales, and we're on that board, and that's the Geneva-based MNCs, and that's the institution, an umbrella institution that we're using. And I'm also working very closely with Bern-based Swiss Holdings. So that should give you a sense of how serious Procter & Gamble is considering this general topic. So with that as background, I have about 10, 12 minutes. It will be a very brief conversation. I think I have to give you just a little bit of data on Procter & Gamble so that you can perhaps better comprehend why Switzerland is so important for us. And then I will, as I was thinking about how to get the point across, instead of a lot of theses, and I just thought, well, I'll just take the slide from our previous board meeting in Cincinnati, where we answered our board members of the company, what are the key conditions for a non-US headquarter? So that's a slide that you'll see. And then I'll go into a little bit of an American analysis about how we rank and rate each one of these points. So, bear with me, it will take only 2 or 3 minutes. P&G is the largest consumer goods company in the world. It's about 220 billion in market cap, 15th largest in the US, roughly 40th globally. That's a complicated number to validate, as you can imagine. Very importantly, 25 $1 billion brands and about 15 $500 million brands. Difficult to prove, but I think given our footprint and given our geographical space, we might be one of the most global and diverse institutions in the world today. Our primary headquarters are in Cincinnati, and our secondary headquarters are here in Geneva. We sell $85 billion, 121,000 employees, operating over 180 countries, plants very significant, and R&D over $2 billion. This is the regional setup, so the geographical footprint of Procter & Gamble. It operates as 5 regions, the largest one being obviously North America, over $30 billion. The second largest one would be roughly what we call EMEA, which would stand for Western Europe, Middle East, Africa. And those combined regions get close to $20 billion. And that's headquartered from Geneva. Then we have our Asian operations with headquarters in Singapore, and our Latin American operations about $10 billion roughly, which are based in Panama. And this next slide will be the last data point on P&G before I move on to the second part of my prepared remarks. P&G keeps a low profile, but P&G is it's a very, very big resident of Switzerland. We started in 1956 with an office in Lucerne, which then quickly moved to Geneva. And that's when we ran our sort of all emerging market operations. You're talking, this is a world where you were doing business through Hong Kong, you were selling through satellite operations to maybe get close to what would have been Eastern Europe and the old Soviet bloc. So That was a different world, but that's how we ran most of the operations that were not in any kind of subsidiary mode back then. So our history in Switzerland and in Geneva is quite long. We're the third largest employer in the canton, and in addition to the geographical oversight of Europe and the Middle East, Eastern Europe and Africa, we also have 8 global business units that are run from here. The group presidents of those units work here and live here. Fabric care, hair care, home care. We have the largest perfume house in the world, and that's run from here. And we have, of course, our Vela Salon business in Braun. To give you a sense, about $30 billion of turnover sales via our Swiss operations. We hire 3,000 employees in Geneva, mostly. We have also offices in Zurich and in Bern. Very, very dispersed group. If you were to come to the office, and some of you here in the audience have actually been to our office, I'll extend the invitation to all of you. You'll be surprised at, number one, just the mass of people. But you'll also be surprised at the languages and the diversity of representation that we have, because we have an influx of all universities from all these parts of the world into our offices. And as I said, we run about 120 countries from the Geneva headquarters. So that's the background that is not very known, but that's what's behind Procter & Gamble here in Switzerland. So given this footprint, we are watching with interest what is happening, what has been happening over the last arguably 4 years, and we are very active in helping to find a solution, because we do believe in the business benefits that Switzerland has to offer. So the key question that I was asked to deal with was what has to be true for Geneva, Switzerland, to remain a favorable location for multinational headquarters. And as I said earlier, I'll show you just, this is the slide. It's straight from the Board of Directors of February. The board meets every 2 months. And there's 4 questions. One is legal, political, and regulatory stability. As you know, in business, the enemy of business generally is volatility, or increased volatility. So we need stability to plan our long-term investments and resource allocations. The second one is all-in cost structure. And we're very open about that statement. It's all-in costs. It's the cost of doing business. And included in that will be the need to have very competitive tax rates. 3 is people. The ability to retain and attract diverse talent. Procter & Gamble promotes from within. So if I lose one of my finance directors in Brazil, for instance, I can't go to a headhunter and bring him or her into the company. I have to just continue with the managers that we have hired from universities around the world. So if that's the policy of the company, we have to be in places that are attractive to young people around the world. So that's an important consideration. And the 4th point is fairly obvious. You do operate very globally, so infrastructure, mobility, connectivity, VSCSs, etc., have to be very good. So we analyze these things for our American principles, for P&G management. And this is where we stack up. And it's a little bit of Americanism in the sense it's very mathematical, but it's an easy way to talk about it. And above all, I think it's very straightforward. So the way we do it is we rank 1 to 5, 1 being bad, 5 being the best. And given the sudden changes that we have had here in the environment, we felt it appropriate to just color code the recent dynamics, and this will be topics for us to discuss further. But legally and political, I mean, obviously Switzerland is the definition of stability, so it's going to be ranked 10 if it could be. But if you look at the last set of referendums over the last 3 years, we have been constantly surprised. And February 9th was the last one. But if you take a step back, and I've been now here in Switzerland for nearly 4 years, but there's a pattern to what we see when we explain it to people who don't live in Switzerland. And the pattern is very clear. Every political event, referendum-driven or broad legislation, has come out a little bit different than we would have expected. So the red is a bit extravagant, but I think it is true that this reality was not what we were seeing 8, 9, 10 years ago. Second one is long-term planning. Same point. I mean, right now, we have so many pending topics that we cannot honestly say what would be the logical outcome of a business idea in 2020. We have to hedge our comments. So the traditional 5 has dropped a little bit. Diversified economy and innovative client, it still is a fantastic and brilliant, and I spend my life on planes and I travel around the world. Switzerland has an extraordinary asset here, so that remains. But the first 2 points, might seem somewhat radical, but I think it is the assessment that we give. On the all-in cost structure, the competitive tax framework, long-term, internationally defendable, and competitive. Those are the three key words. It's always been top, of course. Yet, with the confusion, with a lot of the issues that started with bank secrecy, and with the inability to just say what we're going to have for the next 50 years for our planning horizon, it drops to red. Now, we are convinced that there's going to be a balanced outcome here, but right now it is somewhat of a fluid situation. Cost of living, I think we all smile at this. This one's always going to be not very good. It is, I think, the third most expensive city in the world, and that's probably not going to change. But the corporate environment, I think this is a bit of a judgment point, but there is a sense that the previous very pro-business attitude, particularly in the Swiss Romand, in the Romand cantons, might have moved a little bit, not anti, but a little bit, to away from the traditional positive. On the people side, we still believe that Switzerland and Geneva have got an enormously talented university pool. All the universities we recruit here, they're all tops, and the European universities view Switzerland and Geneva as a good place to be. The issue that we see in which draws the yellow there is the work permit flexibility. We've been meeting with the authorities. Again, I think the problem here is that the arguments have been confused. People are talking absolute numbers. And what happens in a business like ours is we bring in hundreds, but we also send out hundreds. So the net is actually quite a small number. But if you take a fixed position and say that is the number and those are the permits, I think the whole permit count for the Canton of Geneva will be done in about a month. So these are situations that have to be discussed. I mean, we move people around the world very, very quickly, depending on business needs. You can't have will I get a work permit in the back of your mind if you're planning people's careers. So on that point, I think the yellow is how we assess it. Local services and suppliers and educational systems remain excellent. And infrastructure, which, as I said earlier, is taken for granted sometimes because we all think that the world is very, very global. But it wasn't long ago we had a headquarters of Latin America in Caracas, Venezuela. And you would not rank Caracas very well on any of these points. So things do change, but by and large, Switzerland, with perhaps the exception of the Geneva airport, which has ceded its position to Zurich airport, everything else is superb. So those are the 4 points. I'll just go back to summarize them very quickly. Political stability, all-in cost structure, including competitive tax rates, people, and the infrastructure. So in closing, I'd like to just make 2 points. MNCs do contribute a lot of prosperity to Switzerland. I think that's poorly understood, particularly in the perhaps German-speaking side of Switzerland. But about 40% of Vaud and Geneva's turnover, GDP business comes from MNCs. Very significant direct employer. We actually read with interest a study from the Fondation pour Genève that had 2/3 of all employment the last decade came from MNCs. 2/3. And then lastly, it's hard to quantify, but we've done some algorithms and we think that the multiplier effect of multinationals headquarters, because of the type of management that is included in that statement, has a very high multiplier effect on business, just through not just the income tax on the personal income, but also the impact that they have in society, because they generally are family units, fairly conservative attitudes, and of course, a standard of living. So there's a lot of synergies that are created across society or in the location in which these managers live. Having said all that, there are pressing issues that a team, I think of, it's the political elite, it's going to be a series of technical institutions, it's going to be the business community, and hopefully society at large. This country has a fantastically wonderful system of direct democracy. It's the envy of the world. But there are pressing issues to resolve. We need an outcome on corporate tax reform 3. It's got to be competitive. That's for business to decide what is competitive. If they don't like what they get, they'll decide. But it must be inclusive, so all in, and it must be internationally defensible. So the EU and the OECD and BEPS and all these things get covered. by the position that Switzerland takes. Secondly, the work permit thing is a big little problem. It's an obnoxious operating problem that I think doesn't behoove the business environment that Switzerland has created. This might sound a little bit contrarian to the respect that I personally have and Procter & Gamble has for the direct democracy, but the referendum process is becoming complicated, to say the least. Hard to judge, we wouldn't do that, but just again a statement of fact, when we report the situations, if you were to put each one of the referendums on a piece of paper for the last 5 years, 1 year, 3 months, and then come in 6, you find yourself sort of having trouble explaining it to the outside world. So I leave that on the table, but it is more volatile. And then a reflection, as I said earlier, that it's very important, we think, that the business sense of welcoming to multinationals remain as part of Switzerland's fabric. So I'm on time. That concludes my remarks. I will have to say that I won't take questions in this forum, but please, if you want to debate a point or ask me a question, Mario Kran has my email or my phone. I will follow up with you. We just are adopting a bit of a position of not taking too many questions right now, because sometimes it's never clear what comes out of the audience. I'm not referring to the business community. I think you can work out what I meant. And then I would like to, in closing, thank the organizers of the event. So Al-Iktissad, Wal-Aamal from Lebanon. I think I got that roughly right. And of course, the Geneva Financial Center, and to Mario Kran and his team for the logistic support. So thank you very much, and good luck.